Hey everyone, welcome to the weekend edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me this weekend to talk about the stories of the week, to start with, on my right, Charlie Cook. Charlie, of course, is riding Shotgun with Charlie, writing Shotgun with Charlie, Charlie's Gungrams, and he's in about 1 million places on the internet. If you don't know Charlie, you should. Below me, Alex Ooley. Alex, of course, attorney from Southern Indiana, but most importantly, he is the person behind the Forge of Freedom podcast. Brand new podcast this year. If you aren't subscribing, you should. And finally, down below Charlie is Dan Wos. Dan is, of course, the author of the Good Gun, Bad Guy series of books. Book 4 to be coming as soon as he finishes it, but he's got a lot of stuff going on, including in the stuff he's got going on is the Loaded Mic radio program. And Dan, that's a Sunday show?
That's Thursday at 8 p.m. on OpsLens, and you can also find it on Rumble and a whole bunch of other networks.
Okay, so Thursday evening show. Very cool. All right, guys, I want to remind everybody before we get started, if you're watching us live on the Polite Society Podcast YouTube or Facebook page, you can go ahead and get your comments in, and we'll get them up on the air. And for some reason, Facebook is not hooking up to my... I can't get Facebook to load. Why are we not... I don't know why it's not going to Facebook. But, yeah, it shows it is there. And... now it's hooking up. It was operator error in my software. So... there we go. Now we should be going live to Facebook in the next few seconds. And we're getting check-ins from YouTube, so I know that's working. All right. Guys, let's go ahead and... one more try, and I'll come back to that. Let's get started. Big topics of the day today. Well, at midnight last night... 11 p.m. in the Central Time Zone, the only time zone that matters. Most of Florida went permitless concealed carry. Guys, I haven't heard any news stories today about blood running in the streets, about massive crime waves happening with guns in Florida. Charlie, have you heard anything?
I have nothing about the streets of the wild Key West. Nothing.
Wow.
I heard Orlando is ablaze.
Okay. All right. But yeah, it just today I marked it as Florida Freedom Day, meaning you no longer have to go to the government and say, "Mother, may I," to do whatever Americans should absolutely have the right to do. That makes, by the way, Florida, for when it goes into effect, they are number 26. Number 27 will happen in September, October, when Nebraska's takes effect.
I got to say, I thought the thing that Pewarski posted at midnight was pretty funny. that you guys were going back and forth. He's like, "Hey, most of Florida, congratulations, except for the Panhandle."
Yeah. No, the Panhandle's the one that's smart. They're in the Central Time Zone. And by the way, I'm with 3 East Coast time zone guys right now, so nobody's going to agree with me. And Charlie, when he goes to teach in Utah, he's a Mountain Time Zone guy. So,
but we've got now over half the states and half of the United States population with permitless carry, and just like Florida has not seen blood in the streets in this since it was adopted or took effect. That's consistent with what's been going on in the rest of the free part of the United States with permitless carry. No blood in the streets. None of the dire predictions of the anti-gunners have panned out. So congratulations to Florida and to free America.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is a
absolutely.
big day. I was waiting for this tipping point, and we finally got now more, like Alex said, more states with permitless carry than without. And waiting for this day. I think it's a good thing. A lot of people are still going to have permits because they want to travel. I've got my Florida. You're going to need it still to travel to other states or carry in other states, but it's a good message to send.
And get comments in here. We're already getting comments in about Florida. I think Bird of Michigan, Jesus Wins is speaking about the massive fatalities and the gunfights in Florida. He goes, where are they? CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC? Crickets. And guys, if there were issues, the major news outlets would be all over it if there were anything happening.
Yeah, the headlines would, of course, be, "We told you so."
Yeah. Absolutely.
But since there's no headline, we told you so.
Yeah. They can't wait to put something out. Yeah, that's why anytime you see a school killing or something like that, the first thing they do is they've got that they've got those photos of the AR-15 ready to go, and they just roll it across the screen. They can't wait to do that stuff, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to do it here in Florida.
Yeah. I want to get one more comment in here real quick, and then we'll get to the wrap-up of the week's news stories. George Geller says, isn't Florida supposed to be underwater by now? Al Gore said so. Well,
You ever see a manatee in Memphis?
well, there was that one night, but I was kind of drunk. I mean,
It was the 80s.
I still haven't found my car keys. Let's go ahead and go to our first story. Supreme Court to decide gun rights on domestic violence. Alex and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. This off rollcall.com. The Supreme Court will decide whether federal law can prohibit gun possession for people who are subject to domestic violence orders. The first Second Amendment case at the High Court since a decision last year that expanded the right to carry firearms in public. This is not exactly a balanced article, so I'm going to leave it there. But the news is it's starting with the October session. The Supreme Court will take up whether being subject to a restraining order will deny you your Second Amendment rights. And Alex, again, you're our attorney. I'm gonna. We did talk about this yesterday, but I'll let you take off on it now, man.
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings about this case. I'm optimistic that we get a good result at the Supreme Court, given the composition of the Supreme Court. But this is not a case that is backed by any of the gun rights organizations, not by the Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America, Firearms Policy Coalition, or any other gun rights organization. This Zaki Rahimi, the defendant who was charged with a federal crime for being in possession of a firearm while subject to a civil restraining order in violation of 18 USC 922 G8, is proceeding with this case on his own. I think in forma pauperis, which means basically with little or no funds, as a pauper. So this case, the bad thing about this case is that Rahimi is not exactly a model plaintiff. He's not a good dude. So I'm hopeful that the justices are faithful to the Constitution and faithful to the Second Amendment in interpreting this case, and in light of the Bruin standard that was set forth, the text, history, and tradition standard. Because I think if they are faithful to that, if they disregard the character of the plaintiff, I think they'll come out in favor of the Second Amendment and find that this statute is a violation of the Constitution.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. I think there's a little bit of a fear there because he's not the model citizen. Um, but the thing is that I don't think many people are talking about is the idea of being restricted your gun rights because of a restraining order. It's a dangerous policy because you can be you can have a restraining order put against you. Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but by simply an accusation, and you may have never done anything wrong. And there's also somewhat of a fear that this will, if not defeated, this type of policy could affect women in a bad way because their attackers may put a restraining order on the woman, keeping her defenseless. And that was one of the things we were talking about over at GOA. That's one of the concerns there. So hopefully, like you said, that the judge, or the judges, or the Supreme Court will see this in a way that lines up with the Constitution, regardless of the fact that this guy Rahimi may not be, the best guy.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That these restraining orders are often mutual restraining orders, especially in a domestic relations context. So often they're issued without a hearing, or if there is a hearing, the judge errs on the side of caution by going ahead and issuing these restraining orders. So I think they're ripe for abuse, and people are deprived of a fundamental liberty interest with almost no due process and certainly no conviction, because it's a civil restraining order here that we're talking about, not a criminal protective order.
Right.
And if I can add just one more thing, Paul and I were talking about, if a person has done something so heinous that they lose their constitutional rights, wouldn't that crime be enough to keep them in jail? And if not, why not? And if they're not in jail, if the courts see them as not a risk to society, shouldn't they have their Second Amendment right? So there's that whole side of the conversation that I think should be addressed as well.
Yeah, and that's going to dovetail nicely to our next story. This is off the Reload. Federal judge tosses gun possession case against convicted felon. And I'm going to go to the middle of the story here. The government's arguments for permanently disarming Mr. Bullock. I'm going to pause there. This is another case where this is not a poster child for gun rights. This is not a Charlie Cook, a Dan Wos, an Alex Ooley, or a Paul Lathrop. This is not a fantastic person. The government's arguments for permanently disabling Mr. Bullock, however, rest upon the mirage of dicta buttressed by a cloud of law review articles that do not support disarming him. Judge Reeves wrote in United States v. Bullock, in Bruin, the state of New York presented 700 years of history to try and defend its early 1900-era gun licensing law. That was not enough. Bruin requires no less skepticism here, where the challenged law is even younger. The ruling marks the first U.S. District Court to strike down the federal prohibition on convicted felons possessing firearms. Though its opinion only extends to this defendant, Bullock, it will certainly add fuel to the growing legal fire of who can be prohibited from purchasing or possessing firearms following the Supreme Court decision in 2022, NYSERPA v. Bruin. It could also help motivate the Supreme Court to step in and further expound on where the limits of Second Amendment protections lie. Alex, I might as well be another Legal Friday today, because I'm going to go right to you again. Could the Supreme Court, with the previous case that we talked about that they've already agreed to hear, could they expand out and go to discussing the felons in possession and that part of it as well? Or will they most likely want to get their separate case for that?
I think they're likely to have a separate case, because the court typically exercises what's called constitutional restraint. They try to restrain themselves from resolving constitutional issues that are not before them. So they try to decide the case as narrowly as possible on the issues that are before them in the case that they're hearing. So I think that they will decide the protective order case or the restraining order case separately, and there may be some dicta in that case that would show where the court is likely to go in a case like this one, the felon in possession cases. But I don't think that the court will have language or holdings that are essential to that issue in the restraining order case. So I think they'll keep them separate. With that said, I think one thing that's interesting about this case, and you and I talked about this a little bit last night, Paul, this judge, it was a good decision for the Second Amendment, but the judge wasn't happy about it. He let it be known that he did not like the Bruin standard. He did not like the text, history, and tradition standard, but nevertheless applied it, and I think came to the correct result. It's too bad that the judges in many other federal district and circuit courts are not being faithful to the test that was established by the Supreme Court. So even though this judge didn't like it, he did it anyway, and I think came to the correct result. He said that the government simply couldn't support or couldn't provide historical support to uphold this restriction on this ban because there was no historical analog from the time of 1791 or 1868 for that matter. So they couldn't support the text, history, or tradition standard to uphold the restriction in this case.
I've got a quick question. I don't know if anybody can answer it, but is there a discrepancy in the courts between 1791 and 1800s, and is there still an issue there, or have courts settled on 1791?
I think that many courts are resisting the idea that 1791 is the time we should look to. Nevertheless, I think the Supreme Court was fairly clear, and Justice Thomas, in his opinion, was fairly clear that we look to 1791 first as our primary source of history. That's the gold standard. Then we only look to later history to confirm our interpretation of the earlier history. So it's just confirmatory history is all it is.
Charlie, you've been really quiet. Anything you want to add, bud?
I think in the article, I think it's interesting where the person from the DOJ says, quote, "We are not experts in what white, wealthy, and male property owners thought about firearm regulation in 1791, end quote. I think we have plenty of information, don't we? We have plenty of things that these people have written about. I mean, we obviously have some documents that they've filled out and wrote. We kind of have an idea of what they thought about firearm ownership back then, and they just kind of assumed that everybody had one and everyone carried it.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to point out, too, is that this judge and many others have criticized Bruin because they say courts are not well equipped to analyze the history. They're not trained historians. But we're not talking about academic history. We're talking about legal history. And that's all that lawyers do is analyze old cases and decide how those old cases apply to current facts and circumstances in the law. So this is not, I don't think that's a good critique of the Bruin standard because that's what the courts and lawyers do every day is look at the corpus of law that has been developed through old cases and old statutes. So I think the courts and the attorneys writing the briefs and submitting to these courts are well equipped to provide the history necessary to argue both sides of the case.
For sure. And I think it's good, too, that the judge, even though he said he wasn't for it, that he still followed the Bruin decision, which to me seems like he's probably a little more mature than some other folks are.
Well, and it shows me he knows his job. That when you are you're supposed to follow the law, and the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what the law is in the United States. And so if the Supreme Court says you interpret this way, that's the way all federal judges the rest of the way down the system are supposed to interpret it. This guy followed what he was supposed to do. Yeah. Let's see here. This next one this is interesting. I didn't get this till this morning, so we didn't talk about it this week at all. On Wednesday, Senate Banking and this coming Wednesday, the Senate Banking and Financial Institutions Committee will hear Assembly Bill 1587, this is a California story, to require credit card issuers to use specified merchant category codes to designate firearm and ammunition retailers. Please, and then this is from the NRA, please contact committee members and ask them to oppose AB 1587. Since the federal government is prohibited by law from creating and maintaining a registry of gun owners, anti-gun radicals have been attempting to outsource this effort to the private financial sector, thanks to pushback by law-abiding citizens, and Idaho, Mississippi, and Texas banning such tracking. The major credit card issuers have paused implementation. Embarrassed by this setback, the anti-gun radicals are trying to salvage their effort by once again trying to foist a new gun control scheme onto California, which already has its own registry and background checks on top of any federal requirements. There's a federal law that bans a registry from the federal side. The only thing I could think to start, because look, California is so far left. Their left arm is in the middle of their back. That's how far left California is. I think this is going to go through. If you live in California, yeah, call your legislator. But, guys,
gun registry is the ultimate goal. And so we just saw this in Montana with the Montana gun shop raid. They were supposed to go in and only take financial documents. It was an IRS raid. And the gun shop gets raided by 20 armed IRS agents. And I don't know if they took financial forms, but what they did take was the 4473s. They were in the gun shop the entire day until a half hour before closing, and they confiscated the 4473s. This is bad. This is exactly what California will do if they can't get a legal gun registry. They're going to try everything they can through the credit card companies and whatever. That's the one thing we have to stop. We have to stop the gun registries. Through the universal background check serializations, through the ghost gun fear campaign. They're trying to do that with ghost guns. That every gun gets serialized and tracked. We have to stop this stuff because also in their back pocket they have red flag laws, and red flag laws are the ability for government to confiscate guns without due process, and those two will work hand in hand. The gun registry and the red flag laws will work hand in hand. Because before you can confiscate the guns, you need to know where they are. So this has to be stopped. This is probably the most dangerous thing I think we're looking at. Any type of serialization, gun registry, and if you get the credit card companies to do it, it's probably just as bad.
Well, and when we talked about this, when the credit card companies proposed it, it started to be implemented. Look, it will not say what you buy. Your credit card purchasing will only say that you spent $952 at Cabela's. It won't say you bought a lower lower echelon AR. It won't say you bought a case of ammunition. It won't say you bought a whole outfit of skiing wear. It'll just say you spent $952. They're not going to. It's a poor way to get a registry.
Let me push back on that a little bit, Paul, because what if the credit card documentation was, what if they had to give it up? I mean, on your receipts when you buy something, there's usually some form of ID number or stocking number or something, so to find out what the item actually was. I wonder, because I don't trust the government and the DOJ and the FBI and the ATF. So I wonder if they're saying that, but in reality, if documentation was to be confiscated from the credit card companies, would they have that information or not?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And
And
they would. Go ahead.
after you, Charlie.
I was going to thanks. I was just going to say they could probably subpoena the company to get into the receipt system, because as Dan, you were bringing this up, I remember that I've brought things back before, and I've given them a number that was on the receipt, and they were able to pull up the purchase history, so they could see what was on the receipt, so they could make the proper exchange and all that sort of stuff. So this is just one step removed from that. I want to say that one of the attorneys that I really like is Evan Knappen, and Evan Knappen likes to say legislation leads to registration, registration leads to confiscation, and confiscation leads to extermination. So, again, like Dan said, once they know where all of the firearms are, they know to knock on the door and say, hey, these are the guns that we know that you have. Please either produce them or bad things will happen.
Yeah.
Turn them in.
And of course, it will do nothing to prevent crimes. It will only serve, like you say, Charlie, to lead to confiscation and eventually to tyranny and extermination. Because we know that most people who are charged and convicted of gun-related crimes get their firearms from theft, from the black market, from criminal acquaintances, etc., not through lawful means. So, of course, this would do nothing except to serve as a backdoor registry.
Right. To the good people that are taking the training, passing background checks, doing, I'm trying to, Paul asked this last week, what do we call, when the lawful gun owners need to just be responsible gun owners, what do we call them? And I try to call them the lawful background check passing, training taking, responsible firearms. I'm trying to come up with like a really big long term to encompass everything, to let people know that we're not the bad guys that they're wanting to take guns from, or should take guns from.
Well, and let's face it. I mean, if they want to have their dream, if they want all guns gone, well, it'll never ever happen. But if somehow every gun owner in the United States were to turn in all of their guns and all guns in the United States were destroyed, they're going to be back in the hands of, including all the bad guys, they're going to be back in the hands of bad guys in about 30 minutes or however long it takes somebody to walk across the border, the southern border is what I'm speaking of, with a gun. Until they seal the borders off and they stop drugs coming in from the southern border, they're going to keep coming because bad guys don't care what the law is.
Yeah, and I think Alex touched on this. At this point, I think everybody realizes that gun laws are not to save lives. The purpose of gun laws are not to save the children and keep people safe and safer communities and all the nonsense that the anti-gun crowd pretends that these gun laws will do. The real reason for gun laws is to track their political opposition or the people who might stand up and defend their freedom, and that's us. So that's what gun laws are for. That's what registration is for: serialization, tracking, red flag laws, magazine capacity limitations, anything you can think of. It's because of real Americans. It's because of gun owners, and which reminds me of a story I just did an article on about Vermont trying to ban militia activity. And if you notice, there's a lot of push for banning people under 21 from purchasing a firearm. This is militia-age folks. These are the guys who, fought in the Revolutionary War. These are the people. They were 16 years old, sometimes even younger. So if the federal government can prevent militia-age men from obtaining firearms, that's a big win for them. That's one of their fears, I believe. So this isn't about the bad guys.
It really is some sort of crazy utopia where they think that if they take firearms away from people and they make it more difficult for people to own them, make it more expensive, they make just all of these unlimited hoops to jump through, that is not going to eliminate violent people and people that do evil and bad things.
Right.
I know that. Yeah, I fail to comprehend that they don't get this.
No, they do. I think they do get it. The assumption that I've made on that topic, Charlie, is that they do get it, but they're able to fool a lot of people who don't know any better, and those are the people who support the gun regulations and gun restrictions. They're the ones who go to the voting polls and vote for the politician who promises to keep them safe by implementing more gun laws. So I really do believe that they understand exactly what they're doing. And we rack our brains, just like you're saying. Why don't they get it? Why don't they get it? They do get it. These messages are for the people who Sally Soccer Mom, who doesn't really know any better and doesn't follow this stuff.
Right. One of the guys I used to love to listen to in the late '90s, early 2000s was a libertarian in Boston, and he used to say that some people were brainwashed while others just required a light rinse. I absolutely, and these are the people we're talking about, Dan.
Yeah, I know.
Well, Tony Simon is certainly not one of those folks, and he just commented, "It's Charlie. How's Utah?"
How's Utah? Oh, Utah's fabulous this time of year.
Let me get. He also says, preventing militia-aged adults from owning firearms kills firearms culture from being passed down to the next generation. It absolutely does.
Same with taxing ammo and making ammo impossible to acquire. Prevents parents from taking their kids to the range, and it really just kind of eliminates the next generation of kids interested in firearms. They grow up as non-gun owners, and that's part of their culture.
One other thing I'd like to mention here too, since we're on the merchant category code topic still, is that this is and we've mentioned this on the show before, but this is the real danger with the CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, because they're just trying to cut out the middleman. They're trying to cut out the financial institutions and have a direct line to a hand in our pockets. But it's not just a direct line to a hand in our pockets for the purpose of taxes and controlling our behavior, but tracking our behavior and where we spend our money, and penalizing people for the way they spend their money. So that's why I think these central bank digital currency proposals are dangerous and should be fought tooth and nail.
Just thought of while you were talking about that, Alex. Here's another danger. It is currently against federal law to possess, unless you're Joe Biden's son. It is against federal law to possess a firearm if you're a drug user, including marijuana. And what's to stop the credit card companies for creating a merchant category code for dispensaries? And all of a sudden, if you're in a state where you're allowed to legally purchase marijuana, you do, and the next day the ATF's knocking at your door taking all your guns away, and they know you got them because you spent money at Cabela's.
Yeah. Yeah, and not only that, but yeah, it keeps people. That's another. I never understood. Legalizing pot. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who smoke it, and I guess there's nothing. I guess if it works for you, great. It would never work for me, but keeping people sleepy and unable to purchase firearms, that seems like a win-win for the government.
Absolutely. I know he's not necessarily liked by people in our community, but Ted Nugent once said, "Who do you want stoned? Your dentist? Your mechanic? Your surgeon?
Your pilot?"
Right. I mean, I completely agree, and I've got another friend that says some of the same stuff, Dan. He's like, listen, here's the deal. When the government gets everybody stoned because there's a dispensary on every, there's more dispensaries than gun stores in my area, for damn sure. When everybody's stoned, then the government can do what they want to do. When everyone's relaxed, man, and hey, just taking it easy. Right. Then the government can plow through with all of the nonsense they want to plow through.
Yeah. But for the government to do exactly to allow on a federal level for them to take marijuana off the class 3 registry for controlled substances, class 2, something like that, class 1, I don't know. But for them to take that off gives up some government control. I don't think that'll ever happen.
Yeah, for sure. The more I become a gun guy, and the more I get into all of this, the more I become more of a libertarian. And I'm like, dude, if you want to smoke pot, that's fine. Like, don't force it on me, and don't force it on my kids. Otherwise, do what you want to do. Like, really, if that's what makes you happy, then go right ahead. Go right ahead, because we all have to find what makes us happy and what we enjoy doing, and you can enjoy what you want to do, and maybe that's smoking pot and listening to Fish. But if you don't want to do that, you don't have to make other people do it.
By the way, I think you have to smoke marijuana to listen to Fish, but that's another.
Right, exactly. So it's one of those things. Like, let people do it if they want to do it. Great, fine. But it's a two-way street. Let those people do what they want to do, and let us do what we want to do, as long as we aren't harming other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to get on to our next story here, and this actually, I love highlighting SAF wins, but here is a Firearms Policy Coalition win that I think is a huge deal. In a Friday decision, Judge Reed O'Connor smacked down the rule, finding the ATF overstepped its authority to promulgate regulations and instead crossed the line into making new law. This is about the unfinished receiver, the 80% rule. The Firearms Policy Coalition, which sued the agency along with the Second Amendment Foundation and several individual plaintiffs, celebrated a late-night email to members and supporters. We're thrilled to see the court agree that the ATF's frame or receiver rule exceeds the agency's congressionally limited authority, said Cody Wisniewski. With this decision, the court properly struck down the ATF's rule and ensured that it cannot enforce that which never had the authority to publish in the first place. Going on a little bit more, this is a monumental victory against the tyrannical ATF. Firearms Policy Coalition and FPC Law have argued that this rogue agency has unlawfully attacked gun owners in this latest round of rulemaking, and we're glad to see the court agree. We will not stop, however, with this latest victory. FPC and FPC Law will continue to bring these cases to put a stop to the immoral and unconstitutional actions of the disarmament regime. That's in the Vanderstock case, Vanderstock v. Garland. Alex, again, you're our attorney. You are of the four of us. You are the absolute best person to open up comments. What do you think?
Sure. No, this is great work by Firearms Policy Coalition, like you said. I mean, here the Congress defined in the Gun Control Act what a firearm was, and in that Gun Control Act, they said that it's any weapon which 1 will, or 2 is designed to, or 3 may readily be converted to expel a projectile by an action of an explosive. So that's the clear definition of a firearm. And then the GCA and Congress, through the GCA, defined what a frame or receiver was, or did not define what a frame or receiver was separately. So we just assumed that they have the ordinary definition, ordinary meaning of those terms. So what the ATF has done is they've taken that language from the definition of a firearm, that language that says, it's the third part, may readily be converted to expel. So that may readily be converted language, and they've applied that to frames and receivers. So what they're saying is these hunks of metal that we get that can be converted to frames or receivers with some machining, is typically some significant degree of machining, and they're saying that that block of metal is a frame or receiver. And that's clearly outside the scope of the GCA, the Gun Control Act. And so essentially what they're doing is they're rewriting the legislation that Congress wrote, when Congress clearly knew what they were doing when they wrote the Gun Control Act, and could have included that language that they had with the definition of the firearm with the definition of a frame or receiver, and they did not. So the court simply recognized that fact and found against the government in this case. So that's certainly a big win. This was in the Northern District of Texas, so I anticipate that the government will appeal. The Fifth Circuit has been fairly favorable to the right to keep and bear arms. Ultimately, a lot of these cases are going to end up at the Supreme Court.
And Alex, do you know if anybody spent time defining the word readily? Because wouldn't that be the key word?
Yeah, but with respect to a firearm. So the readily only applies to firearm, not to frame or receiver. Congress did not include that language with respect to the frame or receiver portion of the Gun Control Act. So it's either a frame or receiver, or it's not. There's nothing about this readily convertible portion.
I could, theoretically, I could go out to my car, remove the spare tire, take the tire off the rim. There's an awful lot of steel there. I could machine and bend and twist, and are they going to outlaw spare tires? Yeah, it's at some point. Yeah, this readily has to be discussed.
Yeah, I found the language here. It's on page 27 of the memorandum opinion in the Vanderstock case. It says Congress could have included firearm parts that may readily be converted, that language may readily be converted to frames or receivers, as it did with weapons that may be readily converted to fire a projectile. But it omitted that language when talking about frames and receivers. And when Congress includes particular language in one section of a statute but omits it in another section of the same act, it is generally presumed that Congress acts intentionally and purposefully in the disparate inclusion or exclusion of that language. So that readily convertible language, that may readily be converted language rather, was not part of the frame or receiver portion of the statute.
Well, good.
Let's see here. We're probably going to wind up a little early tonight, but I want to get this next story in. This may take us a while to get through too. This is from an SAF press release. The federal judge presiding over a Second Amendment Foundation challenge to the Bruin administration's new arm race rule has denied a request by the National Rifle Association to intervene in an effort to get the same protections for its members as SAF members have been granted. However, the order denying NRA's intervention does not mean the NRA members are out of luck, said SAF founder and executive vice president Alan Gottlieb. They can join SAF and be covered under the rules, the judge's ruling issued last month. case is known as SAF versus ATF. While certain NRA members are disappointed, Gottlieb said by joining SAF they can get the protection of the judge's ruling. And the press release goes on to explain the different membership we have. And I'll just go ahead and say, if you're not an SAF member and you're watching us, why are you not an SAF member? It's $15 a year. It's $150 for a lifetime membership. And your membership goes to help do things like push these lawsuits forward. These lawsuits are not cheap. I was talking with somebody on the air. I believe it was this week or possibly the week. Charlie, I think it was you I was talking with, and you told me that Tom King said it took $2.2 million to get NYSERPA versus Bruin to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that was me that we were talking about this. 2.2 is how much it cost the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, and I think he said the NRA picked up 70% of it. So at a $35 membership, it's a lot of memberships. Like we all need to be joining all of these groups. You need to join the big ones, of course, and then you need to join your state group as well. And if there's another state that you have family or friends or relatives in, join that state as well. And I get all of it's costly, absolutely, but it's something that we all need to do.
Yeah, I'm working with a calculator here. Divided by 35. In order to break even, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association would have had to, in 1 year, get 44,000 members.
It's a lot of people.
So.
But the people. We found this out at the beginning of. Oh my gosh, when was it? It was a few years ago. I don't remember if it was the pandemic or something else. When everyone came out and we had 1 million new members in the NRA, like in a short time period. I can't remember what it was, but it's one of these things where you hear the numbers and say, well, there's 100 million gun owners, and then you hear there's the NRA is the biggest group that we have. They have 5 or 6 million members, and then it just trickles down from there. So if gun owners, if half of the gun owners joined these groups, we would have plenty of money to fight these cases. And the other thing that Tom King brought up to me is that it would be a lot easier to pass bills that are in our favor if we had bigger memberships and these groups had more money and people weren't closet gun owners. It might be a little easier to get our rights back in occupied states.
So, Charlie, what you're saying is it's time for gun owners to come out of the closet.
Yes.
I don't like politics. I don't like the government, but I'd like to be indifferent toward them, but they're not indifferent toward me, and they're certainly not indifferent toward gun owners. So I think gun owners need to take some responsibility for their freedom and the freedom of future generations and join these groups, stay informed and be active. Go to your local county government and go to their meetings and go to the state legislature and speak up, because it makes a difference. Every dollar makes a difference, and every person makes a difference.
It's I'm seeing this a lot more firsthand recently with this gun law listening tour that we had here in Massachusetts, and then the Democrat leader that was running these came out and said he was going to be listening to everybody, and he doesn't want to come down on the lawful gun owners that are passing back. He didn't say passing background checks, but he said we don't want to come down on the lawful gun owners. And everything that was in the bill that he put out on Monday is coming down on all of the lawful gun owners and everyone that's taking training and everyone that's got a license and everyone that's already obeying the ridiculous laws that we have here. So we can't trust the government, and we have to get involved with this. And people need to speak up and speak out.
Yeah, you're absolutely. We need well, and I'm going to do something I haven't done in a very long time. The step number one in the process to get more people into the SAF, to get more people to join the NRA, Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America. Step number one is take a new person shooting. Let them know that, hey, this is safe, this is fun, and it can be a family activity. We need to create more gun owners, and in order to do that, first we must create new shooters. It'll cost you a couple of magazines worth of ammunition out of one of your firearms. Just go to one of your friends who is not currently a shooter. Say, hey, I'm going to the range. You want to go with? That's the number one step to get more people on our side.
Yeah, I've taken friend shooting, and I say, look, I buy the ammo, and you buy ice cream afterwards, and then we are even Steven, right?
Well, and Charlie just came out. Breaking news: Charlie Cook charges people to go on riding shotgun with Charlie. He made Tom King buy him lunch. So,
right. The bar is pretty high. I've been a musician for a long time. So a lot of people are like, hey, we want you to do something. We'll feed you. Will you come play?
Right. You'll get exposure.
Right, you'll get exposure. Exactly.
There's a lot of jurisdictions in the United States where exposure is still against the law.
I am telling you guys, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a left fielder for the Chicago Cubs. But I stunk at baseball. I sat in the outfield with a glove on my head and a finger in my nose. And when I signed up and played in band, I played on every song. I didn't sit on the bench. And after band concerts, my mom took me out for ice cream. And I'm telling you, the math that I did as a 9-year-old boy was, I like ice cream. If I play the trombone, I get ice cream. I think I'm going to be a musician.
Charlie, I thought you wanted to be the trombone player in Kiss. I thought that
trombone.
Was
You know how much ice cream I could get?
I want to know what a trombone would sound like in Detroit Rock City. I really do.
That would be great. You know, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones actually covered that on a Kiss tribute album, and they had a horn section.
Was that the Kiss My Ass album?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, let me.
Are you guys going to Detroit?
Yes.
For the training, all of you. Okay.
Well, I am.
I am not. I'm going this month. I'm going to Virginia and Colorado, so I got to take a week off and not go someplace.
I blame myself for that because I had an opportunity to get Charlie and Rick Ector on the air at the same time, and I blew it.
Oh my gosh!
And so
no, Rick's connection was the one that kind of ruined it. But yeah, it's always a good time. He's good for busting my cookies.
Let's get a couple comments in here, and I did run across this earlier today, but Mike White says, was just looking at my calendar from G-Webs, and today, back in 1972, the ATF was created.
Boo, hiss, boo.
Next one, Simon says, Train, in New Jersey, you can invite people to the Second is for Everyone diversity shoot. We host them twice a month, all year, throughout New Jersey. And to tie that in, and by the way, Tony Simon will be at the end of this month now. It's this month. At the end of this month, there's the women's shooting event in Detroit that Rick Ector puts on. If you know a lady that can get to Detroit, you can tell them to go to this event, and they get a magazine worth of information, worth of experience, and they get a professional trainer right there beside them to guide them. So
I went last year. I interviewed 3 ladies while I was there. I interviewed them before they went shooting and then after they went shooting. And one of the young ladies that I interviewed actually sent me a text message and said she bought her first gun a couple weeks ago. So she was all excited. She wanted to know if I was going to be coming back, and said she got her first gun. I'm like, this is great. This is, this is passing it on.
That's great. It's fantastic. No, I'm not coming back, and you can't make me. All right, guys, we are coming up on the top of the hour. Time to start shutting things down. Charlie, riding shotgun with Charlie, what's coming out in the near future? And besides, and anything else you want to plug, man, what you got?
So the most recent episode of Riding Shotgun with Charlie was Tom King, the president of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. You can find that on YouTube and on podcast. The next episode is going to be coming out on, I think it's July 11th. My passenger is John Colas, who is an instructor here in Massachusetts that wrote a book about pistol practicing. I have an article that's going to be coming out on Armed Lifestyle Magazine with Hickok 45. And on News 2A, I put an article out there this week about the nonsense about the gun law listening tour. So you can check out things there as well. This is the places I try to keep up.
So where did you make John Colas buy you lunch at?
So we actually went to the range. Oh, you know what? We went out to eat as well. We went to the range. We started at one range. We went to another range. And then after that, we went and had lunch at, I forget, we went and had lunch somewhere else. So it was a good time.
All right, I got to make sure I grab the right one before I do the next one here and make sure I'm holding it the right way. But let me get this one up there. Good Gun, Bad Guy, the series of books. The author, of course, is going to be Dan Wos. Dan, tell us about the book series and anything else you want to plug, man.
Well, the book series, Good Gun, Bad Guy, really talks about the mindset of the anti-gunners, the media's involvement in changing the gun narrative, and the politics behind the gun grab. So all three books make up the complete series, and I hope everybody gets their hands on it because we've had great, incredible feedback on it. Everybody seems to love it. It scratches that itch that everyone's been kind of looking for. Because it says the things that aren't being said, and some of the stuff like we talk about today. I go in depth on a lot of these topics. GoodGunBadGuy.com. I write for Ammoland on a regular basis. I'm doing a series for Gun Owners of America called Bullet Points with Dan Wos. It's a weekly video series. And I also have a web show called The Loaded Mic, which I want to get Charlie and his buddy John Petrolino back on here real soon. But the Loaded Mic is at loadedmic.com, and we produced it out of upstate New York. Just a lot of Second Amendment stuff, and just a real blast. All around, just a real blast of a show. So loadedmic.com and goodgunbadguy.com.
I was just thinking it could be absolutely dangerous if you got Charlie and John Petrolino and Tony Simon all in one room at one time.
The studio's not big enough.
Well, we had Charlie and Petrolino last Christmas for the Christmas special. People can find that on Rumble, and it was just an absolute blast. We had a good time. I did. I don't know about you, Charlie, but I had a great time having you guys over.
It's always a good time. We got stuck in a snowstorm on the way home.
Yes.
All right. Alex, Forge of Freedom podcast, and, of course, anything else you want to plug today, man?
Yeah, so I started the Forge of Freedom podcast at the beginning of this year. We've got almost 40 episodes now. Episode 38 is coming out tomorrow. It's actually an episode about a class that I took last week with my wife at the Briar Rabbit Sporting Center in Zanesville, Ohio, and that was with Greg Ellifritz. It was a tactical first aid and system collapse medicine class. So we recorded that episode earlier today. It comes out tomorrow at noon. So definitely check that out. I think you'll find some really interesting stuff in that podcast. My wife is a physician assistant, so she brings some expertise to this topic as well that I couldn't bring otherwise. But the podcast is just about, obviously, I talk about firearms some, but my interests are more than just firearms. I care about freedom more broadly, and we talk about all kinds of topics related to freedom. I just want to help motivate people to develop a mindset and a lifestyle so that they can live a freer life and create a freer world. So that's available on YouTube, Rumble, and just about any podcast streaming platform. There's also a website, forgeoffreedom.com, and I'm on Twitter at the Forge of Freedom.
All right. As you were talking, it reminded me of a meme I seen on Facebook quite a while back. Libertarians, we want to take over the world and leave you the hell alone. Anyway, folks, that's going to wrap up our show for today. It's going to wrap up my broadcast week. Please do come join me 7 p.m. Central Time next week. And I'm moving the Bullet broadcast times. So all across the week, we're going to be 7 p.m. Central Time. All week, come join us live. Everybody, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Podcast listeners, thank you for listening. And we will see you next time.